right, we're going to pick up where we left off last week because we didn't finish the one session because we didn't get to anger. Well, we started anger because I remember saying that just the word itself sounds harsh, anger. So, but what we didn't get to was anger towards God. And I know we had brought this up a few weeks ago about anger towards God, but I did some more searching on it. So, and I think, if I recall, the consensus was pretty much that it's kind of okay to be angry with God. Or am I thinking wrong? Well, what I have learned is that it's not. It's never right to be angry towards God. Because if we are, then we're basically saying to God that he did something wrong. Or he in some way is sinning, and we know that's not possible. Either of those things. God cannot do anything wrong. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I mean, the times that I've been angry, it wasn't because I thought he did something wrong. It was, I mean, you know, I was wrong to think this, but the times I've been angry is because I knew he could affect it some way, and he didn't, so he didn't feel like he cared.
Right. Okay.
It wasn't because
You thought he did something wrong.
no, it wasn't because I thought he did something wrong. It was just because,
Yeah.
I just didn't think he cared enough.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's different. And I believe part of the issue is in phrasing, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But when people say I'm really angry with God because this happened, it's coming from this pleasure that he didn't do things the way you wanted them to come out. So in other words, you pray and pray and pray and pray, and the person still dies. Now they're angry because, God, I've been praying for how long, and you still let the person die. When I think about that, I think about David and how he prayed and prayed and prayed for his baby. And then when the baby died, he got up, put on fresh clothes, and went and had a meal because now he said, okay, God's will was followed. We'll carry on. So, yeah, it happens. The Bible example of somebody angry with God is Jonah. If you read chapter 4 of Jonah, he is not a happy camper that God allowed Nineveh to be saved. And I think part of the story is he's sitting under a tree and he makes some comment about the tree, so God makes the tree die. So now he doesn't have shade. And then he's sitting somewhere else and makes a comment about where he's sitting, and God does something to that, so he's out in the open again. So Jonah's not a happy camper at the end of the book of Jonah, but I think he comes to realize that, God says to him, is it not my option to save these people if I want to? And, Jonah has to say, well, yeah, I guess it is. So, but what I was saying about it's in phrasing, it's not okay to be angry with God where you're blaming him and accusing him of doing something wrong. But it is okay to express your anger towards God because he already knows you're angry. He already knows you're upset that something wasn't quite right. So we should express that to him, but then also confess it, that we were angry with him. And, tell him why. I mean, he already knows, but tell him anyway, and just move on, and then he'll help us put that anger away and go with that. But still what situations would you think of expressing your anger towards God? Jeff, I think you already said something about that. Because I know other people probably have felt that anger, and just to express it is to get it out, get rid of it. So, yeah. Because I can think, I know Connie's not here because she's home sick, but I know she expressed her anger towards God years ago before I got saved, because she and the people she was going to church with were praying for me and nothing happened. So she kind of threw up her hands and, you know, so yeah, those are the types of things, again, or not getting healing or whatever it might be. So he talks about, after that, the weeds of anger. And he made a statement here that I found interesting, that many believers have come to view anger as a part of life. I thought that was rather interesting, because God's word tells us to put anger away. So I was trying to balance out believers thinking anger is part of life and God telling us to put it away, and it didn't quite equate. So I have a couple verses if people would look them up. First is Colossians 3:5-8, and then Ephesians 4:22-31. And these verses directly talk about anger. Go ahead, Mike.
Colossians 3:5-8. Therefore put to death your members which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Because of these things the wrath of God is coming upon the sons of disobedience, in which you yourselves once walked when you lived in them. But now you yourselves are to put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth.
Okay. If somebody has Ephesians
What was it?
4:22-31.
Oh. There we go. 4:22?
Yep. To 31.
You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truth fully to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice.
Okay. So what do these verses have to say about anger? What are we supposed to do with it?
Stay away from it.
Yeah, and I know the verses Michael read said, put it off. I think your version said, put it off, or yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's what we're supposed to do with it, is put our anger away, let God deal with it. It's interesting, the verses from Ephesians also covers something we're going to talk about later, which is sins of the tongue. So, yeah, it's interesting how those verses kind of correlated. So the thing about anger is there are some long-term results from anger. And he talks about them in the book. One is resentment. And that's usually anger that's held on to. And it's usually directed at someone other than yourself. Resentment can then turn to bitterness. And that's basically, he says, it's resentment that has grown into a feeling of ongoing animosity. So now you resented that person, but now it's grown into bitterness where you are continuously have animosity towards that person. It's usually a long-term reaction to a real or perceived wrong. So again, sometimes when we get angry at people, it's a perceived wrong. It's not something they intended to do or say, but we got angry with it anyway. And those, I think we had talked earlier about, those are situations where maybe you would want to talk to that person and say, look, what you said really hurt me, or what you did, instead of letting that fester into anger. So it can happen in church families also. So I have a question. Have you ever been mistreated or misguided in a church family? If so, how did you deal with it? Because I know a lot of people get hurt by church families, church hierarchy, that type of thing. I think Connie told the story of our getting not really mistreated or misguided, but not believed when we brought something to its attention of church leadership, and that really hurt. And I think at that point in time, that church was falling apart anyway, so I think there were some other issues, but that really, for us, that kind of was like, okay, we're kind of done, and didn't know what to do at that point. So, but yeah, it's tough when that happens in a church setting. I mean, you kind of expect some things out in the world, with unbelievers, but when you're in with supposedly a group of believers and something like that happens, especially from the leadership, that's tough to take. So, yeah. And I think that's the big thing when I talk about being mistreated or misguided. It's usually from leadership. You can be kind of mistreated or whatever from someone who's a member of the church, but when leadership does it, that really hurts.
Yeah, I think too that a lot of times when it's leadership in the church or something, and I think you touched on it, that's systemic about it. You said there were other things going on.
Yes.
Usually because leadership isn't handling things correctly.
Yeah.
And they are sometimes in a state of panic over this thing, and then they can't talk about that thing, and I'll talk about that thing.
Right.
And I think it's tough because there's only so much you can do about it. There's a power imbalance there, that kind of thing. And even if you're in a position of power within the church, like if there's a structural problem, then it's hard to break through that. I think the one-on-one kind of stuff, you can have a conversation with someone, and if they're not willing to hear you or you can't resolve it, you can go on with your life.
Yeah.
If this is your whole church, your whole family, your whole ministry, and so I think it's much harder there. And I think that you can go and you can try to resolve it, but what's the verse that says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with all. But some of it doesn't depend on you.
Yeah, and the situation we were in, I was also had been, we had come back from Belize, so I was no longer an elder, but I had been an elder in that church when all of this started, and that really tore me up, and I told Connie, I said, never again. After that, that whole situation really just disturbed me, and I said, never again. And the whole thing then led to us even, I mean, we sought churches for years and we just didn't go anywhere until we found here, so, you know, but, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it can really mess somebody up for a long time. I think of our next door neighbor who, she has father issues and she was mistreated in the church, and we talked to her and it's like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, she's starting to come around, but it's really tough, especially with a father issue, because now you want her to call God Father.
This is where we talked about last week, where the righteous anger or righteous indignation comes
Yes,
in.
yeah.
Because you're seeing people being
Yeah.
angry that I got mistreated. There's some sense of that, but
Right.
it's more about look at all the people that are being hurt.
Yeah,
I think we have I'll say a right to be angry, a cause to be angry there, and to try to fix it. And if we can,
Mhm.
with this person talking about you can, but it's right to be angry when people in the church misuse their position of power or abuse, and then they hurt people and become a stumbling block.
yeah,
They
yeah,
become a stumbling block to their faith. I think that's
yeah,
the toughest thing. And it's one thing to say I'm right to be angry about it. It's another thing to continue to carry that
yeah,
anger with you, and then it impacts. I mean, you have to do what you can do, and if you can't do it, then
yep,
you know, in your case, in that case, you try to be a different example to her.
Yeah.
Try to break through it. Sure, not everybody's like that.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
hard.
And that's the bad thing, is that the person who is impacted is really impacted most times, and it just drives them away.
Yeah, see
Yeah.
that?
So, okay. All right, so then some of the other long-term results, bitterness can then turn into enmity and hostility. And again, that's usually expressed openly, can come in the form of like hateful speech, and it can also spread to other people, which now becomes a bigger problem, because now you're taking your anger and bitterness and it's spreading to somebody else, and it's kind of like whisper down the lane. It just keeps going and going along. Then hostility can turn into a grudge. So now you're looking to take revenge, because now you're really angry and you want to get back at that person for whatever they said or did. And then finally it ends up in strife, which becomes open conflict between the parties. So that's really tough to deal with. So hopefully we don't have that kind of anger going on. So, and I think we talked about this before too, that sometimes God will allow someone to sin against us, but He's trying to teach us something through that. Somebody want to read Genesis 45, 1-8?
1-8.
Yes.
Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of the Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years of the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt."
Okay. So there's a prime example of Joseph. I mean, he had every right to be really ticked off at his brothers for what they did to him. You know, I mean, he was in prison, he was a slave, but God had a plan. And the plan was Joseph was going to be in a place of power, that he was able to save his brothers and his father from the famine that was coming, and keep the line of the Israelites moving along. So sometimes God has a plan in things that we don't like. Sometimes it's things we don't really want to deal with because somebody else did it, but there may be just that plan in the background that God has going for what's going on. But saying that, Joseph was very good about what he did with his brothers, although he kind of teased them a little bit for a while till he got to that point. But how easy is it to overlook somebody that sins against us or does something against us? Or even how easy is it to forgive?
Wow, selling you into slavery? That's pretty hard.
Yeah.
That's pretty harsh, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends
Don't
on the
worry.
magnitude, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think easy is the word for sure, but, you know, first off, we can just fall back on God calls us to. And then the second sort of more worldly view I would add is, I feel like the more time you give someone just being angry at them and holding a grudge, they're probably not giving you that same amount of time. They're probably not taking this as serious as you are, and so you're just sitting there left with these upset thoughts and for no good reason.
Yeah, they probably don't even remember what it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. You're spending more of your time trying to deal with this or be angry with it or whatever it might be, and the other person is just going merrily along their way because they don't probably even remember what it was they said or did. So yeah, you're right. So it's much better. What was the words? I heard a song this week on the radio. What did he say? Something about it's good for you to forgive so it will set you free. Something along those lines. And I thought that was very interesting. I should have wrote it down when I heard it, but and I thought that fits right in here. Forgive and it sets you free. So now you forgive the person, and you can, doesn't mean you forget about it, but you still can move on and not carry that with you for however long it's going to take. Yeah, Jeff.
At my last job, one of the managers there was stealing, and she was stealing a lot. She stole over $1,000.
Wow.
And she also stole from the church's charity fund.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it was bad. She went around and my wife's father died, and she went around and collected the money and kept it.
Oh, goodness.
I had no idea. People came to me and were like, "I really thought better of you. Why didn't you say thank you?" And I'm like, "Thank you for what?"
For what? Yeah.
And then on top of everything else, she tried to frame me for it.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it was really bad. And I mean, when it's premeditated like that, it's really hard to forgive. It really is.
Yeah.
I was having a really hard time with it. Then I realized something. Everybody else was. It was at the point where you couldn't even say her name without somebody. It was like, she must not be named. She must not be named.
Right.
Because people would get angry.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And it was her arrest was in the paper, and it stayed in on their Facebook page until the day they closed down. They were that angry. They never took it off. There was always going to be that shame there.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is ridiculous, being angry over this like this. And I was seeing right there what anger can do to somebody.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I forgave her, but it is really hard in some ways when someone. I mean, I can understand how someone can get angry with someone who's like an addict, and they fall off the wagon and do it deceitfully and stuff like that, or
Right.
you know, steal the money and stuff. Because I've lived it there.
Right.
But it is a lot freeing when you do.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Carrying that anger around almost puts more pressure on you. Because again, like I said, the other person probably doesn't even know you're angry, although she probably did, but yeah.
I think a lot of it too has to do with, she went to jail, I take it?
No, she didn't. She had to give the money back and
Okay.
pay a huge fine.
I think that if it's a situation where the person is removed from your life, like Joseph had all those years, like he didn't have to see his
Yeah.
brothers, or you leave the church or whatever. But sometimes you can't do that. It's a family member, it's a neighbor, it's someone you work with, or whatever. You know, you leave the church, but you're still in the community or
Yeah.
something. I think it's much harder because, like I said before, forgiveness and reconciliation are the same thing.
Right.
And you can't, like, you know, my son-in-law has issues with his mom, and they live in the same small town, and everybody doesn't know how manipulative she is, so it's hard to forgive because it's like it's constantly, you know, the scab being picked at again
Yeah.
and again, and I often think that if he could just get out of there, then he could be free from
Right.
it, be able to forgive and not have to be wounded over and over and over again. That's a difficult thing, or
Yeah.
when other people don't see it, you know, like, imagine if people didn't see it. Imagine if she got away with it and you're the only one who sees it and everyone else thinks she's a saint or something.
Well, I can imagine that. I was the only one who knew for a while. I
Yeah,
figured it out.
you don't have to
Yeah.
imagine it.
And I called my wife about it, remember?
Yeah, I was
She's
probably
like,
more angry.
she was really angry. She's like, tell no one. They'll find her out sooner or later.
Yeah.
She keeps it up.
Well, they did trap her. They did plant money with
Yeah.
cameras.
Yeah.
So kind of.
And oftentimes in situations, even other situations, not exactly like that, but people do tend to trap themselves. You know, if they're saying nasty things about somebody, usually somewhere along the line somebody figures out, wait a minute, that's not really the way things are, and so yeah, they end up eventually getting themselves into a situation where people don't believe them anymore.
Well, and sometimes people can hurt you, and well, like you said, don't necessarily mean it. Like maybe they
Right.
say something. Like I was just thinking on the day I was going to have Daniel's baby shower, someone said something terribly offensive. Like Stephen, our next son up, is autistic, and they thanked me for bringing Stephen to Sunday school because they use Stephen as an example to teach their children how to love the unlovable. And I was like,
Oh yeah.
but she meant it in the nicest way.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm going, that was like the
Wow.
rudest, hurtful thing to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
to me. And I remember going to the baby shower, which a lot of people from church were there, and I was like, I can't believe she just said that to me. And they were all like, oh, sometimes she just says stuff and she doesn't think about it. And I'm like, well, obviously that, you know, but
Yeah.
for I don't know how many years, I just avoid, I mean, this person still goes here. Like, I just avoided her. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just, don't need to talk to you anymore,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where, like, I'm sure, and she talked to me, and I would just be like, yep, and just not, you know, like, wall was up, I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever, I don't care.
No interaction
You
whatsoever.
know, like, no, for like 14 years.
Wow.
And then come graduation night, they sit next to me and just talk, and Stephen, this and that, and I'm going, that unlovable kid that you know, like you,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it was something that it bothered me.
Right.
She probably had no idea that what she said hurt me or, you know, came out the wrong way.
Yep.
Maybe she didn't even realize she was saying those words, but that's what, you know.
Yeah.
But like I said, in her case, she thought she was saying something nice, like
Yeah.
thanking me for bringing him to church. You
Right.
know? But I mean, granted, when he was 3 or 4, he was like kind of nonverbal and probably did cause a lot of havoc in the childhood.
Yeah.
But you know, it was something
Bless
where
you.
it bothered me
Right.
for years and
Right.
years and years and years.
Right.
Whereas this person probably
Yeah.
Never.
didn't think anything of it and didn't mean anything of it, you know. But
Yeah, and I
it
think
just
we-
it just happens.
I think we talked about that last week where there are people that will just blurt things out
Yeah.
and not think about what they're saying, not realizing in your situation that was really hurtful.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's something else too. Is, yeah, people just, and I think we'll cover that a little bit in Sins of the Tongue too, where things come out. So, yeah. Okay. All right. So we are now going to move on to judgmentalism and sins of the tongue. Judgmentalism becomes interesting, and I think before we even start, if somebody could read Matthew 7:1-5.
Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Okay. The first verse there is the one that gets used so often, and it's completely out of context with what's going on in there. We'll hit another set of verses later that covers it too. But judgmentalism can start when we equate our opinions as truth.
That's true.
Yeah. The problem with opinions is they're usually formed by our culture, and the culture changes all the time. So our opinions cannot be truth if everything's changing all the time. And the preferences we have can also lead us to become judgmental. There is a time for it, and we'll talk about that, and specifically when it comes to the church. But like I said, we have cultural changes in society that often don't align with our opinions. And that's when we can become a little judgmental towards what's going on. We develop an attitude that our preferences are based in Christian convictions, when in most cases they're probably not. They're often developed, again, by the culture. If someone's lifestyle is out of line with Scripture, we are right to tell them they are sinning. So how would you do that? How would you tell someone or approach someone that you know is not, they say they're a believer, but they're not living the way they should be? Or should we approach them, or should we go to the church elders?
Very situational.
Yeah, I struggle with all that because it's one of those things that I'm like, do I have any place or right to say anything? Like, it's not, I don't know the situation, I don't know what's going on, I can see something, but I don't know. I struggle with being able to ever say something. I mean, I guess it's, unless someone killed someone, like, I don't know, in my head, I just have a really hard time being like, I don't know, God's with him. Like, I think in my head, it's like, he'll take care of it. I'll pray. I struggle with knowing if it's ever okay to actually say something. I guess situationally, if it's like really bad, but where's that line? I don't know. Someone's really bad is different than someone else is really bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask you, would you feel, I don't mean to put you on the spot, you don't have to answer, you don't have to answer this, but like, I think it goes back to what I've been talking about, like,
Yeah.
would you feel differently if someone was being hurt? you know, a friend of yours
Yeah.
was abusing their children.
Yeah.
Or their
Right.
husband was abusing the children and she was covering for it. I'm just
Yeah.
making stuff up.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, at some point you get to where it's like,
Yeah.
all right, people are being harmed here. But I think just going up to people and pointing out your sin and your sin,
Right.
your sin and your sin,
Yeah.
and your
Yeah.
sin
Yeah,
is not, you know,
yeah,
do you have a relationship with them, one?
Yeah, that's
Correct.
true. Mhm.
And two, like, what is the severity of it? Because otherwise, I'm kind of with you. Let the Holy Spirit show them. If they haven't harmed me,
yeah,
you know,
Right.
it says if your brother sins against you,
right.
go and take it to him. But it's not if my brother sins against, just
Right.
someone sins, and I'm not the junior Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And what you were saying, to go around and point to everybody and say, you better turn that finger around and start here first if you're going to start pointing. As far as approaching a believer or going to the elders for something, I agree. It needs to be something where, like you were saying, there's abuse or there's adultery involved or something like that where you're talking somebody is probably getting hurt somewhere, whether it's mentally or physically. That might be a situation to approach it.
It could be like someone wants to be an elder, and you happen to know that they're,
Correct.
you know, caught in a serious sin. You have
Yeah.
to bring that up.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, if somebody's going to go to be an elder, because, you know, Peter has laid out specifically what the responsibilities are of an elder and what an elder should be going in to the office. So, yeah, something like that, he would definitely want to bring to somebody's attention. I don't know how comfortable I would feel approaching someone.
Yeah.
I would probably approach an elder first before I even think about that. Because now, depending on the situation, now you could be getting involved in church discipline, and that's not something as a non-elder or pastor I'm going to be involved in, is church discipline. That's usually elders. And yes, go ahead.
So I walk a fine line with somebody Jeff and I have helped, and is living with somebody.
Okay.
You know, she was coming to church for a while, and I was like, "Why aren't you coming on Sundays anymore?" And you know, I'll bring that up, but he doesn't work, so I get very frustrated, and you know, I mentioned something about smelling marijuana in her house, and I know he smokes marijuana, and she's like, but he smokes it downstairs, and I was like, Destiny, there's a big grate in your living room. Where do you think it goes? like, you know, she would complain about the neighbor smoking marijuana,
Right,
and here
right.
her living boyfriend is smoking marijuana, and everything smells. I haven't been in that house in over a year because it just smells so bad. And
So obviously it's not for health reasons.
well, it is.
Oh.
He doesn't have a card,
Ah,
but he's still, and he can't get a job because he won't pass a drug test because he won't get a card. Like,
yeah.
you know, it's so she's working 2 jobs. So my patience has been stretched a bit. You know, with I have said things very nicely, like, hey, you know, he really should be working. He's 26 years old. Like, you know, I said, you know, you said that you would never have somebody mooch off of you, which I feel like he's mooching
Yeah.
off of her. Because I'm like, how does he pay for the marijuana? Because he's not bringing in the money. Like, it's so frustrating to walk that fine line of, you know, so this, about 2 weeks ago, I was like, hey, well, I see you in church. Now this is where I'm going, like, passive aggressive, you know, like,
Yeah.
hey, it'd be nice to see the kids at church. And, you know, I mean, I know he's going to Craybill's, he's getting Bible, but she needs to sit and get preached to, you know, a little bit too. And it's just so frustrating to walk that line, you know. You don't want to push her away. You know, she thinks of me as a second mom, bank of second mom, you know. I mean, I've helped them so much, you know, and it's just, yeah.
Mhm.
It's just really a hard
Yeah,
line to keep, so.
yeah. And we have to.
And not be judgmental in the
Yeah.
process.
Well, and we have to be careful not to do some of these things with unbelievers in the world, because they're going to go to verse 1 and throw it right back in your face. You know, who are you to judge me? The Bible says.
It's the only Bible verse I know.
Exactly. Do not judge, for you will be judged. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that?
Because it works well for them.
It works
Exactly.
for them. It's a
Yeah.
good shield.
Yeah. And it's the verse people pull out all the time when something like that starts to happen, whether they're church people or not. Like everybody knows that verse. You know. So yeah.
There's a great story about, I don't know if you guys know who Bobby Knight is. He was a
Yes.
college basketball coach. He was known for being belligerent and actually
Throwing-
physical,
throwing chairs.
throwing
Yeah.
things at
Yeah.
people. And I think it was Larry King show or something he was on, and somebody, kind of pushed him on it, and he pulled out the judge not lest you be judged that, the good book says that, and I just thought, like, here's a guy who's totally not living by the good book,
Right, yeah,
But when
yeah.
it's convenient, you're going to throw it out, and, I think that we're not supposed to judge and condemn and point fingers, but we are not supposed to suspend judgment and discernment with,
Correct.
and that's a different thing. We have one
Right.
word for that, but,
Right.
actually in the Greek language they have many or more than that. But I think that we can still be discerning and say, maybe I'm not going to let that person in my house, what you
Right.
have control over, but they're not, I think we have to look at people as like God's not done with them yet.
Right.
Not judge them for where they are at this minute, if we're trying to help them. And the other thing that's interesting about that passage is it says, well, I think we get this confused too, it says, don't pull the speck out of your brother's eye when there's a beam in your own eye, and he
Right.
doesn't say don't pull the beam out of your brother's eye when you have a speck out of your eye. So we tend to go, I can't judge anybody because I might have some little thing wrong with me.
Right.
And the reality is what he's saying is, yes, do some self-evaluation.
Right.
But maybe you can help your brother. If you take
Yep.
that beam out of
Yep.
your eye, why? So that you can see clearly
Yep.
and take the speck out of your brother's eye.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously somebody has to be willing for you to take the speck out of their eye. You can't
Right.
just reach in and take it without their will. But there is a point in which we are supposed to take take the beam out of our own eyes so we can see clearly and be helpful to other people.
Yeah.
Not in a judgmental way. So
Yeah.
it's not a blanket, don't ever judge anybody.
No, it's not. No. And it's more what you said. It's do a self-evaluation beforehand, before you approach somebody, and just make sure that your reason for going to that person is the correct reason. That you're not doing it to be overly judgmental or to make them feel bad, but do it for the right reason. And I think that's more of what the verse is saying. Examine yourself and make sure when you go to your brother, you're going for the right reason. And not just because you want to be on your high horse and say, aha, caught you.
And I think one of the best ways to judge that for yourself is it difficult?
Yeah,
If it's easy for you to go point somebody's
Yeah,
sin out, then you probably don't need to be doing it.
yeah,
If you really are struggling and wrestling with it, that is kind of the self-evaluation.
yeah,
Checking your own eye first, but
yeah.
I would be cautious if it doesn't come with some consternation.
Yeah, yeah. If you're quick to point things out to other people, that might be a time you need to take a step back and start doing some self-evaluation. So, yeah, okay. He goes on to talk about doctrinal judgmentalism, and we can become hypocritical of those who disagree with us. Doctrine is important. Basic doctrine like the gospel, Christ's death and resurrection. So I guess the question becomes, when we're talking about doctrinal judgmentalism, what things are you willing to die on the hill for when it comes to that?
I think right now it's incredibly difficult because of the political climate. Even I see some people that I know through Hope or close connections to it where they'll say stuff on Facebook or whatever, and I'm like, I can't believe they think that, or, you know, how can a Christian think that way when that clearly can't be right, you know?
Right.
And then it makes me question, well, why do they think that? Am I wrong? You know, because there are so many things that are kind of hot topics right now that it depends on which verse you read, depends on your interpretation of that, you know, whether it's illegal immigrants or whether it's funding for stuff or whether, you know, and you could potentially, you know, depending on what verses you apply to the situation, you could go either way. And it's sort of like, you know, how do we as Christians navigate that and the relationships we have with friends and other believers when it's like, you know, I was talking with Joe, I think last week, and I said something about something I didn't agree with, and I said, but I'm not willing to argue over it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to
Right.
argue about it either.
Right.
And so that's sort of the thing where it's not a hill, for me, it's not a
Right.
hill to die upon. I'll be fine with, you know, one
Yeah.
or the other, but it does make me, you know, think about things a little different, you know, a little differently, because, you know, I'm not opposed to saying, oh, I might be wrong.
Right.
You know,
Right.
this is what I believe, but,
Yeah.
educate me. Maybe I don't know everything, you know,
Yeah.
I do want to know why you feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think that attitude's a little bit better than just being set in stone.
Right.
Obviously, there are some things that I would fight over.
Yes.
But not everything.
Yeah. And that's, Connie and I have talked about it before, and I've kind of laid out, these are the things I will die on the hill for. Everything else is inconsequential. And I'm like you. I'll listen. I may not agree with you, but that's okay. We don't have to always agree on things. But there are certain doctrinal issues that it's like, yeah, these are set in stone. And there's no way that I'm going to not follow this. This is what I'm going to die on the hill for. So, yeah. And everybody's different, I'm sure, with that. So, but you're right. There's so much going on today, and unfortunately, social media makes it worse, because anybody can go on and say what they want, and, you know, just...
Well,
let
and
it
I,
go.
for one, used to be the very argumentative type where I would get into those arguments, especially with my nephew. We would gang up on him at Thanksgiving or whatever. We've learned not to do that anymore, you know, but...
That's why we ran away one year for Thanksgiving and didn't go to the family one.
You don't want to be ganged up on or be
That's
the
right.
one being ganged up on. And it's, you know, I finally got to the point, it's okay to disagree, you know, or we're going to agree to disagree. How's
Right.
that? Yeah, it's, so, you know, I've been posting more scripture or posting more of, you know, we cannot conform to the world kind of things.
Right,
Or as the
right.
world moves this way, we shouldn't be moving along with it.
Right.
Like trying to play the middle of the road, I guess. You know, I said, you know, I'm seeing a lot of, you know, Ukraine right now. I stand with Ukraine. But Ukraine has done some things too, you know,
Right.
that nobody should be very proud of. How's
Right,
that?
right.
But I don't like, you know, Putin did horrible things. You know, I just see a stalemate, you know, which side do you choose? But I prefer to stand, you know, I don't want my money funding a war that's not going to end or not be won the right way, you know, but I'm not going to, I guess I'm not going to post, you know, along with some of the stuff I've been seeing, you know, it's just, it's frustrating,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and like I said, unfortunately, social media has made it so much easier for people to do stuff like that, and that's why I'm not on social media. I don't even want to look
It's
at
like
it.
everybody
so.
has a platform now. There used to be a time when you had to earn your platform.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yep,
Maybe you earn it by being a good singer or an
Yeah.
actor or something, which
Yeah.
is another thing. But like now everybody has a platform.
yep, Okay.
Anybody can say anything they want.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us with, discernment just choose not to, and those without discernment are like, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
like, you want to speak up because you're like,
Yeah.
yeah. As far as like hill that I want to die on, I mean, I have things that I believe that I'm not going to change my mind about. But when I think about dying on the hill, I think, am I actually going to fight someone over it? Am I going to fight over it?
Yeah.
Or divide over it, or leave a church over it? Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I leave a church over certain doctrinal issues. But most of the stuff, even if someone is believing something that I don't believe in, I think it's important, I'm not gonna,
Right.
let's have a fight about it.
Yeah.
And then die on the hill. I mean, that's a war term,
Yeah.
that you're gonna fight to the death over it.
Yeah.
I think Pastor Kirk made a good point with the church renovations. Not everybody is going to agree. Not everybody's going to want this, but we should still be united in the
Right.
end, whether or not we're unanimous or not.
Yeah.
Whether or not would you leave the church over
Right.
this,
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah. And those are the kind of things I'm talking about. It's, would you leave the church because of this? Or
Yeah.
would you stop believing because of this?
Yeah.
Type of thing. And basically, I mean, the main things to me doctrinally are the gospel and the death and resurrection of Christ. Those are the two things. And they're non-debatable. They are what they are. But we can disagree, but we can also do so without degrading the other person that we disagree with. I think that's where social media gets lost, because people disagree, but if you read what they say, it's not really very nice.
Nothing they would ever say to the person's face.
Right, exactly.
No, that's what happens is when you don't have to
Yeah.
say it to someone's face all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And there's been people that, and Joe's experiencing this now, people that are friends that and maybe have some disagreements with them or whatever. But you can sit down and have a very nice, friendly conversation, and be
Right.
very friendly with them.
Right.
And then you see them spouting stuff up on social media, and you're like, I don't even know if I can talk to them anymore. And it's like, but they're not the same person online.
Right.
They are, but there's something that just
There's
like
something different.
keeping that inside and knowing that it's your opinion and it doesn't need to be, stake your ground on it.
The art of face-to-face discussion and telephone calls has been lost by social media and texting. Because and I'm guilty of this too, but most of my communication with my son is by text. Because that's what he likes to do. He grew up with that, so we text. But there are times when I call him and I just say, hey, you really need to know this, that kind of thing. But yeah. Yes, Jeff?
There are some drawbacks from that, though. We have a system called ProCare that our boss can get to everybody at once over certain issues and stuff.
Okay.
And people were genuinely mad when she put certain things in all caps.
Yeah, that's
And,
another one. All
yeah,
caps
I'm
is not good.
I'm like, all day I was hearing staff
Yeah.
just complaining about that, and I'm like, because it's the texting way of yelling at everybody.
Mhm.
And so, it was, it's very interesting. And, the thing is, like you were talking about picking your battles, I pick very few battles at work. I have a lot of women, I work with women who are very passive aggressive. But there was one person, she said something to me rude, and she did it right in front of the kids.
Mm.
And I have a tough class. I don't need them losing respect for me.
Right.
So I looked at her and I said, that was out of line.
And you got to.
And I did it right in front of the kids too, because I
Right.
want the kids to know that I'm standing up for myself.
Right.
And that,
Right.
I'm not putting up with this kind of stuff
Right.
from them or from her.
Yeah.
So, and later on, she never apologized, but she came at me the next time a lot nicer.
Yeah.
And a lot easier. So,
Yeah, and if you wouldn't have done that, your kids would have lost some respect for you, and
She would have
that's
too.
tough.
She would have too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, okay. Can someone look up John
Start
8.
matching my headache.
John 8, 1 to 11. I'd like somebody to read that. Because that's going to take us into the next thing of judgmentalism, which is a critical spirit.
One to 11.
Yes.
But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now, early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him. And he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.
Okay. That brings out, and I know Jesus, there's, in the book of Matthew, I forget what chapter it is, but Jesus does the 7 woes, and it's all about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. This is also the same thing. They only brought that woman because of their own critical spirit, that this woman did something wrong. Now, yes, we know she did something wrong, but we're trying to trap you. And the whole thing comes out, and it's the same in the woes about, he talks about their hypocrisy and all the different things they do. They had a critical spirit that can affect other people, and that's the problem with the critical spirit. They look for fault in everything, and that's what the Pharisees were doing. They were trying to find whatever fault they could to trap Christ, and it never worked. And I think that ticked them off even more. But to them, they were the only people that could do something right. So when they looked out at everybody else, nothing that you or you could say or do was ever right, because they're the only ones that are right. Unfortunately, a lot of times a spirit like this is used on a child, and that child will develop an attitude that they cannot ever do anything right, and that's not very good. I don't know if you've ever known anybody like that, but just thinking, if you did, what would you try and say to somebody like that to convince them that, no, you're wrong. You're made in God's image. You can do things that are right. I don't even know if there's word. Well, Jeff, you teach kids. What would you say to a kid?
They thought everything they did was wrong.
Yeah. Because it was drilled into their head at home that they can't do anything
I
right.
just tried to be as positive with them as I could.
Okay.
At everything, you know. Well, they're young, so any kind of positive usually works with them.
Right.
And one thing I'm constantly doing, because it's a small room, I'm constantly tripping over chairs. Is when they get up, the first thing you do is you push in the chair. I'm constantly when they remember to do it, I want them to keep remembering it. So I make a big deal out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You remembered pushing a chair. Great job.
Right.
And and they love that. And I mean, at that age, that's how I would handle it. I'd be like, showing them that they can do a lot of things right and praising them for when they do something that they should.
Yeah. Positive reinforcement would be a big thing with that. Unfortunately, I know in the book, he tells a story of a young girl that got treated like that at home, that she could never do anything right. And she grew up that way. Nobody ever came along and tried to convince her otherwise. And she ended up in drugs and everything else. And then if they get to that point in life, I think it's a lot tougher now to pull them aside and say, hey, you know, don't believe that you can't do anything right.
For me, that was hard because I told you before, my dad expected straight A's.
Okay.
So that was hard for me not to put on my kids.
Mhm.
Like, I expect them to do the best. And, you know, having a 9th grader now, I'm like, you're going to have to start doing homework on the weekends. But it's my weekend now. No. It's
Yeah.
a time for you to do homework if you need to. Like, you know, it's just, and it is. I said you can have your fun, but you can also set aside an hour to get stuff done. You
Right.
know, it's time management, and I don't think that's a bad thing to learn.
No.
You know, but yeah.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, the rule was homework first, then you play. And that carried all the way through high school and everything. Homework first, then you go out with your friends. So when we had our kids, it was the same thing. Homework first, then you can go and play. Unfortunately, when they got to high school, they stopped giving them homework. So it's like, oh, we do it in school. Okay. You know, well now it's, yeah, totally different. But yeah, things like that are not bad. It's when the person is constantly told, just taken down and brought down and told that you're never going to do anything right. You're going to grow up and you're just going to be a mess and you're not going to be able to do anything right. And yeah, that's when it gets to the point of, that's the critical spirit that usually affects the person that's being told the information, not the person that's telling it. Same thing with the Pharisees. Didn't affect them that they had a critical spirit, you know. Didn't affect them that they'd go into the temple and say, oh, thank God that I'm like this person, or that I'm not a woman, or whatever. You know, to them, that was normal. But to the people that they were working with, that's a whole different story. So yeah, that gets to be very bad to the person it's directed toward. Yeah, Mike.
So, I mean, we're not parents, so I don't pretend to have this all figured out. But one thing that I think is important to me is just living with as much openness and transparency as you can, like sharing successes and sharing failures with those around you.
Mm-hmm.
Because to just act like you only have successes and pointing out to others things they should be doing better, it is only going to put them down.
Yeah.
And we've all got failures, and so if
Yeah.
others know, hey, to a point that's okay, and to a point we should be working on fixing that and getting better every day,
Right.
I think that's only a good thing.
Right. And the biggest thing is to set an example for your kids.
Yeah.
That's what we tried to do. I mean, when my son got older and I knew things were going on in the high school, and I sat him down one day and I said, look, I'm going to tell you something straight out. I said, whatever you think you want to do involving alcohol, drugs, whatever, I said, I will know because I've already done them. And he kind of just looked at me, and it registered, you know. But even years later, we've had him come back to us and sit down with the two of us and look at us and say, I just want you to know, as far as my life and marriage, I want what you have. So it's like the example. You set the example for them so that they can see the good and the bad. You know, like I never hid anything from my kids about my past in college. So they got the good and the bad, but they knew which side was better. And so, yeah, that's all you can do. And no, it does not hurt to encourage them to do better.
I just said, but I was pushed to that,
Yeah,
to an extreme. And then,
yeah,
I went to college. I had a roommate. My dad called, and my roommate told him I was out. Well, she better get an A in that class or whatever. And I was like, I did not. I got a D- on the one class. I worked my little heart out. I mean, I was the type of person who didn't have to study, unfortunately. I could just read something once and be done. He hates that, but it was just something, the more I studied for a class, the worse I did. Don't ask me why, it was awful. So he did not see that report card, but.
yeah. My wife hates the fact that I did this all through LBC. I can watch television and do my studying. I watched television and wrote a 35-page paper for one of my classes and gave it to her. And she was like, "How did you do this?" She said, "You sat there and watched football and baseball, and this paper's amazing. I got an A on it." She's like, "Hey, that's what I do." She said, "What about the library?" I said, "No, I can't go to the library. If I go to the library, I'll fall asleep. I need this." And she just, to this day, she's like, "I don't get it." She said, she'll say, "He can sit there and read a book and watch TV and he'll tell you what's going on, even though he's reading the book."
Comprehend that. I can't even comprehend that.
Yeah, it's different, but we're all different. So yeah.
You had asked just one other, I guess, life experience. Like, what do you do, or how do you help someone who's just constantly putting themselves down so they can't be good enough? I know I'm blessed with parents that just were amazing at not doing that and also bringing other people up. And I think it's a matter of showing up. 3 of my best friends, it was 4 of us growing up, all 3 of them were atheists, and they would claim it constantly.
Okay.
But my parents loved them endlessly. And it was one of those things that all 3 of their parents were going through divorces. They all felt it was their fault, right? It was all happening at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
And when their parents weren't showing up, my parents went to their soccer games. I didn't see my parents a lot, but it was, they showed up. They went to the accolades. They went to my dad worked at a fun house place thing, and he did it because he got to be a mentor to all these high school guys that were so lost.
Right.
And he would come home and be like, "Hey, I'm going to the high school soccer game tonight." I'm like, "What? I've never kicked the soccer. Like, soccer is not our thing." He's like, "Oh, well, Dom's playing." And I'm like, "Oh, there's one of his kids again." It's just, he would show up, and he showed up both of them showed up for so many people that just felt so lost. And at graduation, he had like 20 people around him, kids, just, "Dave's here, da-da-da, like, thanks for coming, Dave." And he's like, "Well, my daughter did graduate too."
Yeah.
So like, that's kind of why I'm here, but I'm here for you guys too. So like, they saw hope, someone that gave them hope that no one else did. And I saw what it did to so many other people, and I don't know, it's just really neat. I'm so thankful I got to watch that, because that's what matters. And I don't know where a lot of them are in life, but I know my one really good friend is in the point of questioning, like, do I believe, do I not? She would never even consider it before. It's 13 years later, but she's kind of like, maybe what was being taught to me when I was at Britt's house is something worthwhile listening to. So I don't know, just showing up for people. You don't have to say anything. You don't need to judge it. You don't need to.
No, you don't.
Condemn it. Just be there.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the way it was at our house. Our kids' friends hung out at our house. We were one of, I think, only 2 couples that were still married. All the other kids were from families that had divorces. And we just accepted these kids for who they were. We loved them. We showed them a loving relationship. I mean, they'd come over, and the first thing they'd walk in the door, they'd look at my wife and say, "Hey, Miss Connie, what kind of Kool-Aid you got in the
Yep.
refrigerator?" You know, one year we did an Easter egg hunt for them, and that was hysterical to watch these 15 and 16-year-olds knocking each other over to try and find these eggs. But you know, you watch them grow, and then over the years, we've been invited to some of their weddings, and it's been interesting to see them grow. And the one young man came up to us at his wedding, and he walked up to us and he said, "Miss Connie, Mr. T," he said, "I want you to know I'm only doing this once." And that we were like, oh, you know, and he came from a divorced family.
Yeah.
You got it.
So they got it. And that's the type of thing, if you have that ability to affect their lives, that makes a change. Because whether you know it or not, your kids and your kids' friends watch everything you do. Our son still watches everything we do at 42. And we just try and give him the best that we can as far as getting him back to being a believer. So yeah, I haven't talked to him a whole lot about it. We kind of let it go for a while.
Sometimes you need to.
So, but yeah, that's tough. I mean, because then you read the story in here about, he says that they came from an upper middle class Christian home where the father was hypocritical, especially of the male child, the daughter. She developed into a person who could not do anything right. At least one would think as much to hear her dad berate her. But the more he criticized her posture, the way she slumped, the more he pointed out her lack of eye contact, the more her eyes became fixed and down-gazed. If his repeatedly putting her down for her own good had one result, it was a type of self-fulfilling prophecy. She felt her father's pattern of criticism as rejection, and she came to see herself as a reject. As an adult, her number one priority became to seek out those who would provide her with acceptance, and her friends soon learned how to take advantage of her need to be accepted. And that's where it gets bad. So, you know, he repented of his spiritual criticism, but it was too late by then. She had secretly become promiscuous and a crack cocaine addict. So again, that's the situation there. I didn't even think about that one at first, but they will seek out people who will give them what they think they need. And usually the people that are doing that know it, and they'll take advantage of that person as much as they can. And that gets even worse than thinking you can't do anything. Now you have people taking advantage of you, and you still think you're not right and you can't do anything right. So yeah, that was a tough one. The critical spirit is tough for putting people down, and that's what we got to be careful of. Again, we can disagree with somebody, but do it in a way that we're not putting them down or disparaging them or telling them well, your viewpoint on that is stupid, you know, that type of thing. And that just makes people worse and want to just kind of sink back into themselves. So, and that's the same thing, I think bullying falls into this category. Because when somebody's getting bullied, now they start feeling bad about themselves for being bullied. And it's even worse now because people bully on social media. And that really affects the person even more, because now they know that not only do they know it, but everybody else knows about this situation. And it gets tough. So, yeah. Okay, I think we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up sins of the tongue next week and flow right into the next chapter from there. But yeah, does anybody have any last comments or questions or? don't think anybody in here has a critical spirit, so we're all good.
Certainly try not to.
What's that?
Certainly try not to.
Okay. Yeah. It
I
gets,
have,
I
like,
think it gets tough at work
Yeah.
because now you get a work situation and, you know, your boss is constantly telling you, well, you didn't do that right and you can't do this right, and now it's like, oh, okay. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Yeah. You were gonna say something, I'm sorry.
No.
Oh, okay.
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hang on to these till next week.